Jeff Bridges has quietly put a piece of Malibu coastline up for sale. Not a luxury home, not a celebrity mansion, but a stretch of land where his family home once stood for generations. The reason isn't a career move or a lifestyle change. It's what happened to that property in the 2025 California wildfires, and why its price today tells a much bigger story about loss, rebuilding, and the hidden cost of living on America's most desirable coastlines. And the most surprising part isn't how much the value dropped, it's when that drop began. The strongest moment in this story doesn't start with the listing. It starts with timing. According to publicly available property records, the Malibu home inherited by Jeff Bridges and his siblings was briefly listed for sale in July 2024, with an asking price of $9.2 million. At the time, it wasn't an unusual move. The beachfront property had been rented out on multiple occasions over the years, and like many long-held family homes in Malibu, it represented both sentimental value and substantial real estate equity. Then, on January 7, 2025, something changed. That same day, the listing price was reduced to $85 million. And within hours, wildfires broke out across parts of Southern California, fires that would go on to reshape entire neighborhoods, including Malibu. According to a spokesperson speaking to TMZ, the Bridges family home, a 4-bedroom, 4-bathroom house passed down through generations, was destroyed in those fires. No dramatic announcements, no public statements from Bridges himself, just confirmation that the structure was gone. And that's where the story takes an unexpected turn. Instead of relisting the home, the family removed the property from the market entirely. For months, there was no price, no photos, no sales push, just silence, until it came back. This time, the listing wasn't for a home at all. It was for land. A bare parcel of Malibu beachfront, listed at $4.95 million. Nearly half the value of the original asking price just 18 months earlier. And recently, that number dropped again to approximately $4.37 million. Same location, same oceanfront stretch, completely different reality. The listing itself is carefully worded, focusing not on what was lost, but on what could be built. It describes the property as being located on one of Malibu's most desirable stretches of coastline, with an all-sand beach and a favorable low tide line. Rather than dwelling on the destruction, the language emphasizes opportunity, calling the former home's foundation a solid footprint for future development. But what that wording quietly reveals is something far more important. In Malibu, even after a fire, land still has value, just not the value it once did. And Jeff Bridges isn't alone in facing that recalculation. According to multiple reports, he is one of several well-known homeowners who lost properties during the 2025 wildfire season. Others reportedly affected include Paris Hilton, Anthony Hopkins, Miles Teller, Mandy Moore, and Heidi Montag with Spencer Pratt. Yet focusing only on celebrity names misses the larger pattern. Because behind the headlines, entire communities saw their housing wealth change almost overnight. A housing data analysis conducted by Realtor.com researchers examined fire-affected zones such as Pacific Palisades and Altadena, areas with very different income levels but similar exposure to wildfire risk. The findings were striking. In Pacific Palisades, the total value of destroyed homes reportedly fell from $14 billion in late 2024 to $10.8 billion by the second half of 2025. In Altadena, values dropped from $7 billion to $7 billion over the same period. And even homes that weren't completely destroyed, but merely damaged, saw noticeable declines. But here's the part that changes how this story is understood. Even properties that weren't touched by flames, homes that remained standing, experienced value losses simply because they were located within burn zones. In some cases, the decline wasn't about physical damage at all. It was about risk perception, insurance uncertainty, rebuilding timelines, future fire exposure, all of it priced in. Which raises a difficult question that doesn't have an easy answer. When a home disappears, what exactly is being sold? The land, the memory, or the gamble that the next owner is willing to take? And in places like Malibu, that question becomes even more complicated. Because for decades, these homes weren't just investments, they were family legacies. Jeff Bridges' property wasn't a recent purchase or speculative flip. According to publicly available information, it had been passed down from his parents, Lloyd and Dorothy Bridges, to Jeff, his brother Bo, and their sister, generations tied to one address, and now one empty lot. But the financial impact extends beyond individual families. Analysts studying post-fire sales found that homes reduced to vacant lots and later sold in 2025 typically closed at roughly 50% below their most recent pre-fire purchase prices. Not because the land disappeared, but because rebuilding introduces cost, delay, and uncertainty that buyers factor in immediately. And this is where the Bridges listing becomes symbolic rather than personal, because it shows how quickly perceived value can shift, even in markets once considered untouchable. And what happens next isn't just about Malibu. It's about how wildfire risk is quietly reshaping real estate across California, and what that means for homeowners who haven't been directly affected yet. That part of the story is just beginning. To understand why this shift matters, it helps to look at how buyers and analysts interpret fire-affected properties once the headlines fade. According to the Realtor.com analysis, researchers examined homes purchased between 2020 and 2024 that were later destroyed and resold as vacant lots in 2025. Across both Pacific Palisades and Altadena, sale prices were typically about 50% lower than their most recent pre-fire purchase prices. That decline wasn't driven by panic selling. It reflected math. No livable structure, high rebuilding costs, long permitting timelines, and no guarantees about future fire seasons. In other words, the market wasn't reacting emotionally. It was recalibrating risk, and that recalibration didn't stop at destroyed homes. Even properties that sustained only partial damage saw their total assessed value decline. In Pacific Palisades, damaged but standing homes reportedly dropped from a combined value of $2.2 billion to $1.9 billion. In Altadena, values fell from approximately $825 million to $658 million. But perhaps the most revealing data point involved homes that weren't damaged at all. Simply being located within the hardest-hit burn zones was enough to trigger measurable value softening. Aggregate values declined by roughly $1 billion in Pacific Palisades and $600 million in Altadena, despite those properties remaining physically intact. This is where Jeff Bridges' listing becomes more than a personal real estate decision. It becomes a case study. Because his Malibu property wasn't discounted due to neighborhood blight or declining demand for oceanfront living. It was discounted because the structure, the thing that made the land immediately livable, was gone. And replacing it isn't simple. Rebuilding on coastal California land involves strict environmental regulations, extended approval processes, and rising construction costs. Add wildfire mitigation requirements, updated building codes, and insurance challenges, and the timeline becomes unpredictable. For buyers, that uncertainty has a price. For sellers, it becomes a choice. Wait, rebuild, or sell the land as is. The Bridges family appears to have chosen the third option. The current listing focuses on possibility rather than loss. It emphasizes the nearly 5,000 square foot footprint of the former structure, positioning it as a foundation for future development rather than a reminder of what once stood there. From a market perspective, that language is deliberate. It shifts attention from the past to potential. But even potential comes at a discount now. The broader numbers help explain why. Taken together, Realtor.com analysts estimate that the fires erased approximately $8.3 billion in housing value across Pacific Palisades and Altadena alone. And that figure does not include losses in Malibu, Topanga, or other affected communities. In other words, what happened to one celebrity-owned property reflects a much larger economic reality. And this reality raises another question that many homeowners are only beginning to confront. If value can decline this sharply without a sale ever taking place, how should property be measured? By past prices, current conditions, or future risk? For decades, coastal California real estate was treated as insulated from volatility. Limited inventory, high demand, and cultural prestige created a sense of permanence. Wildfires have challenged that assumption, not by eliminating demand, but by changing the terms under which demand operates. Buyers are still interested, they're just more cautious. And caution shows up in numbers, which brings the story back to Malibu. Despite the loss, the Bridges property is still listed at over $4 million, a figure that would be considered extraordinary almost anywhere else. The coastline, the sand, and the exclusivity still matter. But so does the memory of what happened there, and so does the question of what could happen again. This isn't a story about decline, it's a story about adjustment, and that adjustment isn't finished yet. Because the long-term impact of wildfire risk on high-value coastal real estate may take years to fully surface, especially as insurers, builders, and buyers continue to respond. Which leads to the next part of this conversation. What happens when rebuilding isn't just expensive, but uncertain? And how does that uncertainty reshape who can afford to live in places like Malibu in the future? That's where the story goes next. At its core, this story isn't about a listing price or a famous last name. It's about how quickly certainty can disappear, even in places long viewed as untouchable. Jeff Bridges' Malibu property still holds extraordinary appeal. Oceanfront land, direct beach access, and a location that has defined California's coastal identity for decades. But what the recent price shifts reveal is a change in how that appeal is evaluated. Not emotionally, not symbolically, but practically. Today, value is no longer tied only to views and location. It's tied to timelines, insurance availability, rebuilding feasibility, and the growing awareness that environmental risk is no longer theoretical. For families who have owned properties for generations, that shift can be especially difficult. A home is more than square footage, it's continuity. When that continuity is broken, decisions become less about maximizing profit and more about choosing the least uncertain path forward. In Jeff Bridges' case, the decision to sell the land rather than rebuild appears to reflect that reality. Not a retreat, but a recalibration. And that recalibration is happening across California. As fire-prone regions adapt, the definition of prime real estate is quietly evolving. Some buyers will see opportunity, others will see exposure. And the market will continue to adjust, not in dramatic crashes, but in steady, data-driven shifts. The larger question now isn't whether these areas will recover. It's how recovery will reshape who lives there, who builds there, and who decides the risk is worth taking. Because what happened in Malibu isn't an isolated moment, it's an early signal. In the next video, we'll look at how rebuilding rules, insurance pressures, and changing buyer behavior are already transforming other high-profile coastal communities, and what that means for homeowners who haven't been directly affected yet. If you want to understand where this trend is heading, that's where the story continues.